The night Thomas Whitmore died, Maria was the only one in the room. She stood in the corner, perfectly still, as she'd been taught. The old master's breathing had turned shallow hours ago, each exhale a wet rattle that echoed through the suffocating August heat. The single candle on the nightstand cast dancing shadows across his gaunt face, making it seem like he was already halfway to whatever judgment awaited him. "Water," he croaked. Maria moved forward, her bare feet silent on the worn floorboards. She lifted the pewter cup to his cracked lips, supporting his head with her other hand. His skin felt like old parchment, thin enough to tear. "You know," he whispered, his milky eyes trying to focus on her face. "You know everything, don't you, girl?" Maria said nothing. She never said more than necessary. In the 7 years since the ship had brought her to this suffocating Virginia plantation, she'd learned that silence was the only possession they couldn't strip from her. But Thomas Whitmore was right. She did know everything. She knew that his son James wasn't actually his son. The boy had the same narrow-set eyes as the overseer, Samuel Crawford. She knew about the locked room in the west cellar where the account books that mattered were kept, separate from the ones shown to visitors. She knew which enslaved women had been taken to that room and never spoke of it again. She knew about the 3 children Thomas had sold south 5 years ago, his own blood by Sarah from the weaving house, sold to cover gambling debts in Richmond. She knew because the enslaved always know. They clean the rooms where secrets are whispered. They serve the dinners where deals are made over Madeira wine. They stand in corners, invisible as furniture, while white men speak freely of things that would hang them if the wrong people found out. "The war's over now," Thomas continued, his voice barely audible. "They talk about liberty, about all men being created equal." He let out a sound that might have been a laugh. "But you and I, we know better, don't we?" Maria lowered his head back to the pillow. Through the window, she could hear the cicadas screaming in the darkness, that endless summer sound that had driven her half mad her first year here. In her homeland, whose name she whispered only in her dreams now, there had been different sounds at night, different stars. The overseer had told her she'd come from somewhere on the Gold Coast. She'd been maybe 15, maybe 16 when they branded her on that beach. They'd renamed her Maria because her real name was too difficult for English tongues. Everything she'd been before that day had been forcibly erased, like charcoal smudged off slate. But memory couldn't be whipped out of a person. She remembered her mother's hands teaching her to weave. She remembered the market on feast days, the smell of spices and roasted plantains. She remembered the songs, though she'd stopped singing them after the middle passage, after watching 24 souls throw themselves into the ocean rather than face what waited on the other shore. Thomas's breathing changed again. Maria had seen enough death in this place to recognize its approach. His hand shot out, surprisingly strong, and gripped her wrist. "Listen," he gasped. "My son, James, the papers in the desk." His eyes widened with sudden urgency. "Don't let Catherine find them. The ones with the red seal. Promise me." Maria looked down at the hand clutching her wrist, at the age spots and blue veins visible beneath translucent skin. How many times had hands like these struck her, shoved her, claimed ownership of her body as if it were livestock? "I can't promise nothing, Master," she said quietly. "I'm just a slave." Something flickered in his eyes. Was it fear? Regret? He released her wrist and fell back against the pillow. 10 minutes later, he was gone. Maria pulled the sheet over his face and walked to the door. She'd need to wake young Master James, tell him his father had passed. Then the house would explode into motion. Mourning, arrangements, relatives arriving from Richmond and Williamsburg. And in that chaos, in those moments when everyone was too distracted to watch carefully, Maria would need to make her decision, because she'd already seen the papers Thomas mentioned. She'd been dusting the study 3 weeks ago when James left the desk unlocked. She hadn't meant to look. But once she started reading, slowly, carefully, using the letters the old mistress's daughter had secretly taught her years ago, she couldn't stop. Those papers contained the truth about who really owned this plantation, about the debt that had transferred ownership 2 years ago to someone in England, about how the Whitmore family had been living a lie, maintaining appearances while technically holding stolen property, about the falsified inheritance claims, the forged signatures, the bribes paid to county officials. If the wrong people found out, the entire Whitmore legacy would crumble. The family would lose everything. And Maria held the only other key to that information now, locked in her memory where no one could take it from her. As she walked down the dark hallway toward James's room, her heart hammered against her ribs. The floorboards creaked beneath her weight, each sound impossibly loud in the sleeping house. If you're listening to this while driving, working, or resting, drop a comment telling us where you're from. And if this story's already got you hooked, leave that like. 3 doors down lived 23 other enslaved people, her people. Some stolen from Africa like her. Others born into this nightmare, knowing no other life, all of them bound by the same invisible chains, survival depending on reading the moods of their captors, on swallowing rage, on pretending to be less than human so the humans would leave them alone. Maria had built something with them over the years, not quite a family. This place destroyed too much for that word to fit, but a network. A web of small kindnesses and shared understanding. A way of passing information through songs, through the way laundry was hung, through which pot got used at supper. They trusted her because she was careful, because she'd never been broken, not in the way the masters wanted, because something in her eyes told them she still remembered who she'd been before they renamed her. And now she carried knowledge that could either protect them all or damn them forever. Maria reached James's door and raised her hand to knock. Tomorrow, the entire Whitmore family would gather for the funeral. They'd come from across Virginia, these parasites in silk dresses and embroidered waistcoats, offering condolences while secretly calculating inheritance shares. And somewhere in that chaos, Maria would need to decide: would she protect the secret that kept her enslaved, or would she risk everything to speak the truth that America had tried so hard to silence? Her knuckles touched the wood. Everything that came next would depend on what happened in the morning. The Whitmore plantation wore mourning like an ill-fitting coat. By noon the next day, the main house buzzed with relatives Maria had never seen before. They arrived in carriages that kicked up red dust along the drive. Women in black bombazine dresses, fanning themselves against the brutal heat. Men in dark coats speaking in hushed, grave tones that barely concealed their curiosity about the inheritance. Maria moved through them like a ghost, refilling glasses, clearing plates, absorbing every whispered conversation. 70 acres and 43 slaves, someone murmured in the parlor. Not including the debts, of course. Is Catherine capable of managing such an estate? A woman asked, her voice dripping with false concern. Catherine Whitmore, Thomas's widow, sat rigid in the drawing room, her face a practiced mask of grief. But Maria had seen her in private that morning, frantically searching Thomas's study with shaking hands. She'd been looking for something. The papers with the red seal, perhaps. She hadn't found them. Maria knew because she'd watched from the doorway, hidden behind the curtain. "More wine, Maria," Catherine snapped without looking at her. "Yes, mistress." Maria poured, her hands steady despite the growing knot in her stomach. She'd spent the morning debating with herself, weighing options that all led to different kinds of death. Speak up, and they'd hang her for impudence at best, for theft at worst. Stay silent, and she'd remain property forever, watching these people profit from lies while she and her people suffered. But there was a third option, one that terrified her more than either extreme. In the kitchen house, separated from the main building by 20 yards of bare earth, the other enslaved people worked in synchronized silence. Big Joshua kneaded bread dough with massive hands scarred from years of fieldwork before he'd been moved to the kitchen. Temperance stirred a pot of stew, her face expressionless, but Maria caught her eye for just a moment. A question passed between them, unspoken. "You all right?" Maria gave the slightest nod. "For now." "I heard Mistress Catherine talking to Master James this morning," Temperance whispered when they were briefly alone by the hearth. "She wants to sell some of us. Says she needs the money to keep the house running until the inheritance settles." Maria's blood turned cold. "Who?" "Didn't say names, but Joshua's worried. Strong field hand like him fetches good money." Temperance's voice cracked. "We got 3 children, Maria. If they sell him south..." The words hung in the air between them, heavy as chains. Being sold south meant the deeper south, Georgia, the Carolinas, where rice plantations worked people to death in a year or two. It meant families torn apart forever, children left motherless, husbands and wives separated with no hope of reunion. It meant the final destruction of whatever fragile connections they'd managed to build in this hell. "I won't let that happen," Maria said, the words escaping before she could stop them. Temperance looked at her sharply. "What can you do? She caught herself, but they both knew what she'd been about to say. "You're just a slave, like us." Maria turned back to the stew pot, but her mind raced. The papers, the truth about the plantation's ownership, if she could somehow use that information. But how? She couldn't read them openly. They'd beat her for even admitting she could read. She couldn't go to authorities. They'd never believe a slave over white testimony. And she certainly couldn't trust any of the Whitmores with the truth. "So you're trapped, girl," her mother's voice whispered in her memory. "You've always been trapped." "Maria!" She jumped. Catherine stood in the kitchen doorway, her widow's veil thrown back, face flushed with heat and anger. "I need you in the study, now." Maria's heart stopped. Had Catherine seen her watching this morning? Had someone reported the missing papers? She caught Temperance's frightened glance as she set down the ladle and followed Catherine across the dusty yard. "You're about to face something you can't just bow your head and survive," she thought. "Choose carefully." Inside the study, James Whitmore stood by his father's desk, holding a leather folder. His face was pale, eyes red-rimmed, whether from grief or worry, Maria couldn't tell. At 23, he'd always been the gentler of the family, sometimes even speaking to enslaved people as if they were human. But gentle still meant owner. Gentle still meant he could sell her tomorrow if it suited him. "Maria," Catherine said, closing the door behind them, "my husband kept certain papers in this desk, important documents. They're missing." Maria kept her face carefully blank. "I don't know nothing about no papers, mistress." "You clean this room every Tuesday and Friday," James said, his voice tighter than she'd ever heard it. "You were alone here for hours at a time. Did you see anyone enter, touch anything?" This was it. The moment she'd been dreading and somehow expecting since Thomas Whitmore had gripped her wrist last night. She could lie, could say she'd seen nothing, knew nothing. Could walk away from this room and back to the suffocating safety of invisibility. Or dose into the conversation, then subscribe so you don't miss the next real stories. Hit that bell. Maria looked at James, then at Catherine. She saw the desperation in their eyes, the fear they were trying to hide behind authority. They needed those papers, which meant the papers had power. "I might know something," Maria said slowly, each word measured. "But I need something in return." The silence that followed felt like the moment before lightning strikes. Catherine's face went white, then red. You need your property, girl. You'll tell us what you know, or what?" Maria interrupted, surprised by her own voice. "You'll beat me? Sell me? You already own my body, Mistress Catherine, but you can't own what I know, not unless I choose to tell you." James grabbed his mother's arm as she lunged forward. "Mother, wait!" He studied Maria with new eyes, as if seeing her for the first time. "What do you want?" Maria's pulse thundered in her ears. She was about to speak words that could end her life, but they might also save it. "Freedom papers," she said. "For me, for Big Joshua and his family. And no one else on this plantation gets sold south." Catherine let out a bitter laugh. "You're mad. We would never—" "Then I guess you'll never find those papers," Maria said quietly. "And whoever your husband was hiding them from, they'll come asking soon enough." The room held its breath. They didn't agree that afternoon. Of course they didn't. Catherine had James throw Maria into the root cellar. Not exactly a punishment cell, but close enough. Dark, damp, cold, despite the summer heat above. She spent the night there among sacks of potatoes and hanging herbs, listening to mice skitter in the darkness and wondering if she'd just signed her own death warrant. "You got too bold," she told herself, shivering against the earthen wall. Should have stayed quiet, should have survived. But then she remembered Temperance's voice cracking when she talked about Joshua being sold. She remembered the 3 children who played in the dirt behind the quarters, not knowing they might wake up one morning with their father gone forever. She remembered every person on this plantation who'd looked at her over the years with that same desperate hope, hoping she'd somehow make things better because she was the one who knew things, who remembered things, who hadn't been completely broken. Above her head, footsteps moved across the kitchen floor, voices, the morning breakfast service starting without her. The cellar door opened, flooding the space with blinding daylight. "Get up," James said. His voice was different, tired. "Mother wants to talk." Maria climbed the wooden ladder, her legs stiff from the cold night. In the kitchen, breakfast preparations continued around her as if nothing had happened, but she caught Temperance's eye across the room, saw the question there. Still alive, still fighting. Catherine waited in the small parlor, the one they used for private business. The morning sun cut through the windows at sharp angles, illuminating dust motes floating in the heavy air. She looked like she'd aged a decade overnight. "Sit," she said, then seemed to remember who she was speaking to. "No, stand there." Maria stood. "My husband left this plantation in chaos," Catherine began, her voice brittle. "Debts I didn't know about, obligations, promises made to people I've never met. And now you tell me there are papers that could destroy everything we have left." She looked up at Maria, and for just a moment, there was something raw in her eyes. Not quite humanity. Maria knew better than to expect that, but exhaustion, the bone-deep tiredness of someone barely holding on. "I can't give you freedom papers," Catherine continued. "It's illegal in Virginia without county permission. The authorities would ask questions. Questions would lead to investigations. Investigations would uncover exactly what we're trying to hide. Then we got nothing to talk about," Maria said, turning toward the door. "Wait." James stepped forward. "What if we offered something else? Money, enough to buy your freedom in a few years. Better treatment in the meantime, your own cabin, we could—" "No." Maria's voice was flat. "Freedom papers or nothing. For me, Joshua, Temperance, and their children. And a signed document saying no one else gets sold." "You're asking for the impossible," Catherine snapped. "I'm asking for what your husband stole from us," Maria shot back. "Our labor built this place. Our blood's in every brick, every board, every acre of that tobacco field. You talk about what you have left? You never had nothing that was rightfully yours." What do you think of this story? Share it with that friend who loves real history. And comment, did you already know this story? The slap came fast, Catherine's palm across Maria's face, hard enough to snap her head sideways. The room went silent, except for Maria's sharp intake of breath. "Don't you dare," Catherine hissed. "Speak to me about rights. You have no rights. You are no one. Without us, you'd still be running around half naked in some African wasteland. That's enough, Mother." James's voice cut through the tension. He stepped between them, and Maria saw his hands shaking. "This isn't helping." He turned to Maria. "Give us 3 days. 3 days to figure out a way to make this work legally. If we can find a path to freedom papers without exposing the documents, we'll do it. But you have to tell us where the papers are now. As good faith. Maria touched her stinging cheek, tasted blood where her tooth had cut the inside of her mouth. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to hold on to the only leverage she had. But James's eyes, there was something different there. Not quite sympathy. He was still a Whitmore, still someone who'd benefited from her enslavement his entire life. But maybe, just maybe, a crack in the foundation, a hint that he understood, on some level, how fundamentally wrong this all was. The papers are in the hollow behind the loose brick in the study fireplace, Maria said finally. 3rd row from the bottom, left side. Your father showed me where he hid them once when he was drunk. Didn't think I'd remember. Didn't think I mattered enough to remember. James nodded slowly. 3 days. I promise, Maria. We'll find a way. Your promises don't mean nothing to me, Maria said, but I'll wait because I got no other choice. She walked out before they could respond. In the kitchen house, Big Joshua was loading wood into the stove, his massive frame moving with careful precision. He looked up when Maria entered, read something in her face. It started, hasn't it? He said quietly. Whatever you're planning. I don't know if I'm planning anything, Maria admitted, or if I just signed all our death warrants. Temperance appeared from the pantry, flour dusting her dark hands. What happened? Maria told them. Everything. The papers, the bargain, the 3-day deadline. As she spoke, other enslaved people drifted closer. Old Samuel from the stables, young Rebecca who worked in the gardens, Nathan who tended the horses. Word spread quickly in their world. Secrets were survival. They won't honor it, Samuel said flatly. He'd been enslaved for 50 years, had seen owners make and break 1,000 promises. Soon as they get them papers, they'll forget everything they said. Maybe, Maria acknowledged. Probably. But it's the only chance we got. And if they don't? Rebecca asked. She was 17, about the age Maria had been when they'd stolen her from home. If they lock you up, or worse? Maria looked around at their faces, at the hope and fear warring in their eyes. She thought about the knowledge she carried, about the power of truth in a world built on lies. Then y'all will have to decide, she said quietly. If I disappear, if something happens to me, those papers are hidden where I said. One of you who can read will have to figure out what to do with that information. None of us can read, Nathan pointed out. Then you'll learn, or you'll find someone who can. Maria straightened her shoulders. One way or another, the truth's coming out. They can't silence all of us forever. Big Joshua stepped forward and for just a moment placed his huge hand on Maria's shoulder, a gesture of solidarity that could get them both whipped if the wrong person saw. Whatever happens, he said, we're with you. Maria nodded, not trusting her voice. The 3 days were about to begin. 3 days that would determine whether she died a slave or lived free. 3 days for truth to battle silence. And she had no idea which would win. The first day passed in deceptive calm. Maria returned to her duties, scrubbing floors and serving meals as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The Whitmores treated her differently now, warily, like a dog that might bite. Catherine barely looked at her. James watched her constantly, as if afraid she might vanish with her secrets. On the second morning, a rider arrived from Richmond. Maria caught glimpses of him through windows, a stern-faced man in a brown coat, carrying official-looking documents. He and James closeted themselves in the study for hours. That's Solicitor Bradford, Temperance whispered as they prepared dinner. He handles legal matters for the county, estate transfers, property disputes. Freedom papers, Maria asked. Sometimes, if he can be convinced. Temperance's voice dropped lower. I heard Catherine arguing with James last night. She wants to sell us all and flee to her sisters in Charleston, start fresh somewhere nobody knows the family's business. Maria's stomach knotted. If Catherine won that argument, they were all doomed. That evening, James found Maria in the washhouse, her hands raw from lye, soap and hot water. "We might have a way," he said without preamble. "Bradford says there's legal precedent. If you were to testify that my father promised you freedom in his will, and if we can show you've performed extraordinary service to the family, the court might grant manumission despite the usual restrictions." Maria looked up from the washboard. "Testify in court?" "Yes. You'd have to speak publicly about my father's wishes, about your service." He stumbled over the word, and Maria understood why. For her testimony to work, she'd have to claim Thomas Whitmore had been a benevolent master. She'd have to praise the man who'd owned her, lie about his kindness, pretend her enslavement had been anything other than theft. The hypocrisy made her want to scream. "And Joshua's family?" she asked instead. "Bradford thinks we can include them as part of the same testimony. Say my father valued Joshua's work, intended to free him eventually. It's thin, but it might work. And the promise that no one else gets sold?" James hesitated. "That would have to be informal, not legally binding, but I give you my word, Maria, as long as I control this estate, no one will be sold south." "Your word," Maria thought bitterly. The word of a man who owns human beings. But what choice did she have? "When?" she asked. "Tomorrow. Bradford can bring a judge to the plantation for a private hearing. It'll be quick, quiet. If it goes well, you could have your papers by tomorrow night." Too fast. It was happening too fast. Maria's mind raced, looking for the trap she knew had to be there. "And the documents?" she asked. "The ones with the red seal?" James's face darkened. "We found them where you said. Bradford's reviewing them now, determining what needs to be done to resolve certain complications. Will any of it become public?" "No, that's the whole point." He stepped closer, and Maria saw genuine desperation in his eyes. "Maria, those papers prove my father engaged in fraud that could invalidate this entire estate. If they come to light, we lose everything. The plantation gets seized by creditors, and everyone here, including every enslaved person, gets sold at auction to the highest bidder. You understand? Your freedom papers would be worthless. You'd just be property transferring to a new owner." Maria understood perfectly. She was being asked to protect the very system that enslaved her, to keep silent about crimes that affected her own captivity, because exposing the truth would hurt her as much as it hurt the Whitmores. It was the most Virginia logic she'd ever heard. "Holding your attention, drop that like and share. Let's get this story to more people." "I'll testify," she said finally, "but I want those freedom papers in my hand before I say one word to any judge." That's how it's happening," Maria cut him off. "Otherwise, soon as I testify, you got no reason to actually free us. We both know how this works, Master James. I may be enslaved, but I'm not stupid." A long silence stretched between them. Finally, James nodded. "Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Bradford will have the preliminary papers ready. You testify, and if the judge approves, you'll have your freedom by noon." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Maria, I want you to know He struggled for words. "I know what my family is. What we've done. I can't undo it. But maybe this is a start." After he left, Maria stood alone in the washhouse, staring at her reflection in the tub of dirty water. Tomorrow, she might walk free. Tomorrow, Big Joshua's children might grow up without the threat of being sold away. Tomorrow, she might finally reclaim the name they'd stolen from her. Or tomorrow might be another lie, another broken promise in a lifetime of broken promises. That night, Maria couldn't sleep. She lay on her pallet in the quarters, listening to the breathing of 12 other people in the cramped space, and thought about her mother, about the village she barely remembered, about the girl she'd been before they'd branded her and renamed her and tried to erase everything she'd been. I'm still here, she thought fiercely. You didn't erase me. I remembered, I survived, and tomorrow, maybe I fight back. Just before dawn, Temperance crept over to her pallet. Joshua says if something goes wrong tomorrow, she whispered, if they try to hurt you or lock you up, we're ready, all of us. We'll fight if we have to. Maria gripped her hand in the darkness. Don't. If it goes bad, you run. Take the children and run north. There's people in Philadelphia who help. You remember the songs I taught you? The ones about the river and the drinking gourd? Those weren't just songs, Temperance breathed. No, they were maps, instructions. Maria squeezed tighter. Promise me. If I don't come back from that study tomorrow, you take your family and you run. I promise. As the first grey light of dawn crept through the cracks in the walls, Maria rose and dressed in her cleanest shift. Today she would either become free or die trying. There was no middle ground anymore. The war for her own story, the story America had tried so hard to silence, was about to reach its end. Judge Harrington arrived at 8:30, a thin man with wire spectacles and the tired eyes of someone who'd seen too many ugly truths hidden behind genteel Virginia manners. Maria stood in the hallway outside the study, flanked by Big Joshua and Temperance. James had surprised her by allowing them to be present. Witnesses to the proceedings, Bradford had called it, though everyone knew enslaved testimony held no legal weight. Maria! Bradford called from inside. We're ready. The study had been transformed into a makeshift courtroom. Judge Harrington sat behind Thomas Whitmore's desk. Bradford stood to one side with sheaves of paper. James and Catherine occupied chairs near the window, and there on the corner of the desk lay a leather folder. Freedom Papers. Maria could see her name written on the top document. State your full name for the record, Judge Harrington said. This was it. The moment Maria had been preparing for, consciously or not, since the night Thomas Whitmore died. She could say Maria could play the role expected of her. Could be grateful and humble and everything white Virginia wanted from an enslaved woman seeking freedom, or she could speak truth. My name, she said slowly, clearly, is Adais. It means daughter of the king in my language. I was 15 years old when you people stole me from my home on the Gold Coast. You branded me, renamed me Maria, and spent 7 years trying to make me forget I was ever human. The room went dead silent. Maria, James said urgently. You need to stick to what we discussed. I wasn't born Maria, she continued, her voice growing stronger. I was born free. I was stolen, brought to this plantation, and forced to witness things no human being should see. I watched children torn from their mothers. I watched men worked until they collapsed. I watched women, her voice cracked. I watched things I got no words for in your language. Young woman, Judge Harrington interrupted, you are here to testify about Thomas Whitmore's wishes regarding your manumission, not to his wishes? Adais laughed bitterly. You want to know his real wishes. He wished I'd forget how to read. Didn't know his daughter taught me when I was 16. He wished I'd forget the account books showing how he sold his own children to cover debts. He wished I'd forget the papers proving this plantation ain't even legally his, that he'd been running a fraud for 2 years before his death. So, what did you think? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. We have new stories every day. Catherine shot to her feet. She's lying, clearly disturbed. This is exactly why enslaved people cannot be trusted to... I have the papers, Adais said quietly. The ones with the red seal. Mr. Bradford has them right now. They're real. Everything I'm saying is true, and you all know it. Judge Harrington removed his spectacles and pinched the bridge of his nose. Mr. Whitmore, is this accurate? Is there documentation supporting these claims? James looked at his mother, then at Bradford, then at Adais. She saw the decision forming in his eyes, protect the family or admit the truth. Yes, he said finally. Some of what she says is accurate. My father left the estate in complicated legal circumstances. Complicated, Adais repeated. That's one word for it. However, Bradford interjected quickly. Those complications have no bearing on these freedom papers. The manumission can proceed regardless of estate ownership questions. Can it? Judge Harrington looked at Adaise with new interest. Young woman, Adaise, you said? Are you aware that by revealing this information, you're potentially destroying any goodwill that might have led to your freedom? I'm aware, Adaise said. I'm also aware that freedom given out of fear or bribery ain't real freedom. I want my papers, but I want them because they're owed to me, not because I helped hide white people's crimes. The judge studied her for a long moment. Then, impossibly, he smiled slightly. You realize you're putting me in a difficult position, he said. If I grant these papers now, it looks like I'm being coerced by threats of exposure. If I refuse them, it looks like I'm punishing you for speaking truth. Then I guess you got to decide, Adaise said, what kind of judge you want to be remembered as. Another silence. Then Judge Harrington picked up his pen. The law, he said carefully, allows for manumission in cases where an enslaved person has performed extraordinary service or where there is documentation of owner intent to grant freedom. Based on testimony provided and evidence reviewed, I find sufficient grounds to grant manumission to the individual known as Maria, formerly referred to as Adaise, and to the family of the individual known as Joshua. He signed the papers with quick, decisive strokes. However, he continued, looking directly at Adaise, I'm also obligated to review these other documents you've mentioned. Mr. Bradford, I'll need to see everything related to the estate's legal status. If fraud occurred, it must be addressed regardless of current ownership. Catherine made a strangled sound. James closed his eyes. Adaise, the judge said, sliding the signed papers across the desk. You're free. Take these documents to the county clerk's office within 30 days to have them officially recorded. Until then, carry them with you at all times. Adaise's hands trembled as she picked up the papers. The ink was still wet. After 7 years, after a lifetime, 3 pieces of paper declaring her a human being again. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me, Judge Harrington said. You won this yourself, by refusing to be silent, by remembering who you were before they tried to erase you. As the judge and Bradford left to examine the Whitmore documents, Adaise walked out into the bright Virginia morning, freedom papers clutched against her chest. Big Joshua and Temperance followed, their own papers already signed and witnessed. Behind them, the Whitmore plantation continued its daily rhythms, unchanged on the surface. But everyone there knew something fundamental had shifted. One voice, one woman's refusal to be silenced, had cracked the foundation of the entire system. In the months that followed, Judge Harrington's investigation would expose the Whitmore fraud. The plantation would be seized and sold. The enslaved people would be transferred to new owners, some worse, some marginally better, all still trapped in the same evil system. But Adaise was gone. She traveled north, papers always in her pocket, moving through a country that would continue fighting over slavery for another 80 years. She found work in Philadelphia. She learned to write as well as she read, and she began recording stories, her own and others, the stories America tried so hard to silence. Years later, an abolitionist newspaper would publish her testimony. Most white readers would dismiss it as propaganda, but enslaved people throughout the South would read it in secret, passing pages hand to hand in the darkness, finding hope in the knowledge that someone had spoken, someone had remembered, someone had refused to let their story die. Adaise never forgot what her name meant, daughter of the king. Not a king in Virginia's understanding, not ruling over others, not building wealth on stolen labor, but royalty nonetheless. The royalty of a human being who refused to be erased, who carried memory like a torch through the darkness, who understood that truth once spoken aloud can never be completely silenced again. That was her victory, not perfect, not complete, but real. And sometimes, in a world built on lies, simply being real is the most revolutionary act possible.